Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner in the Apocalypse. Chapter 161, Second Stage of Evolution. Bai Zemin together with Shangguan Bing Shui and Wu Yijun quickly set to work. Without straying too far from each other, because while it was true that all the wolf spiders had been slaughtered, they did not know at what point more enemies might appear, so they began to search through the thick forage now tinged with red that covered the forest like a carpet. Here is a soul stone. Here's one too. Not even 10 seconds had passed when the two women called out from a distance. Bai Zemin bent down just in time and picked up another soul stone before placing it in his palm and looking at both stones. His eyes flashed, and just as he was about to ask a question under his breath, Lilith's beautiful and unmistakable voice sounded in his ears. As I told you before, all monsters have chances to generate a soul stone. Even the weakest and lowest level monsters are no exception to this rule. In fact, even zombies will start generating mana stones with relative regularity when their levels reach 10 or so. Bai Zemin nodded to himself and she continued, you should hurry up and get that obsolete weaponry built by you humans. That way you can bring people to search for and gather as many soul stones as possible. Is something wrong? Bai Zemin whispered in a voice that only he could hear. Not much, Lilith replied calmly. As you may have noticed, mankind's firearms don't affect the First Order too much, so you'd better start manufacturing weapons from the material of the evolved monsters. Bai Zemin frowned tightly and after a quick thought realized that indeed, Lilith's words were true. Fortunately, he had already made preparations, and currently, the survivors were working on dismantling the bodies of the mutated and evolved animals. I will get to work on that as soon as possible. Bai Zemin secretly made a mental note. Besides, Lilith interjected again. You don't need to worry too much about the matter of the New Age monsters. While it's true that strange creatures will gradually appear, they won't be able to reproduce with each other until this world enters the second stage of evolution. What? Second stage of evolution? Bai Zemin's eyes widened and he could barely contain his voice low to avoid being overheard and potentially being considered a lunatic. Lilith's voice was not heard again for a few seconds until he finally heard it again. The mana of the world was sleeping for countless years, probably even from the first moment this planet was born. Now it's like a newborn that learned to crawl thanks to the soul record. But it still needs to learn to walk, then to run, and so on and so forth. In short, the sooner you form your own power and faction, the better it will be for you and your future. Bai Zemin took a deep breath and nodded without saying a word back to her. After all, second stage of evolution or 10th stage of evolution, such things were not something for him to worry about currently. His main focus had not changed and what he needed to do had not changed either. He just needed to become stronger, just as he had been doing since the first day the soul record arrived on Earth and awakened the sleeping mana. The sound of footsteps behind him made him turn around slowly only to see Shangguan Bing Shui walking in his direction with Wu Yijun beside her. Both women were carrying a pile of soul stones in their arms. What do we do with this? Shangguan Bing Shui looked at him before looking at the soul stones she was holding with a puzzled expression. She had already checked it out for herself in the past and indeed, soul stones can empower magic spells depending on the type of stone. As long as the soul stone was not focused on a particular element, it could be used as an energy catalyst and increase the magical damage inflicted on the enemy to a great extent. Of course, this also depended a lot on whether the soul stone was a normal or first order and so on. Furthermore, if she used a normal first order soul stone to cast an ice spell and used an ice type first order soul stone, it was natural to assume that the effect would be a lot more efficient. It was precisely due to all this that Shangguan Bing Shui knew that soul stones were an incredibly valuable treasure at the moment. Therefore, she was worried about what to do with such a treasure. After thinking for a moment, Bai Zemin decided, let's just leave them here temporarily. After securing the military armament, we can bring a large number of survivors to gather and move them. Wu Yijun nodded and remarked, I agree with you. Otherwise, it will take us years to find all the soul stones among all this thick grass. Shangguan Bing Shui hesitated for a moment before gently laying the soul stones on the ground again. However, she took several for herself and kept them in a small leather bag she wore tied around her waist. Wu Yijun did the same and Bai Zemin also kept some. Just as he finished storing several soul stones, he remembered something important and told the girls to wait a moment while he slipped through his records. Evolution requirements. Bronze skin, first order passive skill, level 4, level 5. Stamina stats over 300 points without external support, complete. Soul stone, 9 out of 9. Do you wish to evolve the bronze skin skill to the next level? Xietain looked at the two women beside him before finally deciding to evolve the skill. In any case, the fact that skills could evolve wasn't a secret, it was just that probably no one had done it yet. 9 unclassified soul stones came out of his bag and floated in the air before they began to glow under the astonished eyes of Shangguan Bingshui and Wu Yijun. When the evolution process finished, Xietain looked at the new skill and noticed that now, instead of plus 140 stamina points, bronze skin level 5 gave him a total of plus 160 stamina points permanently. A solid 20-point improvement, which was equivalent to 10 levels in stat points. That was the evolution of a skill? Shangguan Bingshui asked in wonder. Right, Xietain casually responded with no intention of hiding anything before returning to surprise the women beside him with another evolution. Evolution requirements. Health boost, unclassified passive skill, level 5. Health stat over 150 points without external support, complete. Soul stone, 15 of 15. First order soul stone, 1/1. Do you wish to evolve the health boost skill to first order? With a single thought, soul stones of different grades flew out of his bag and began to rotate, forming a strange diamond that abruptly entered his body. The rune representing the health boost skill flashed brightly, and his entire soul seemed to become purer as his body felt a lot lighter than before. Just the evolution of a skill made Xietain feel as if a great weight had been lifted off his shoulders. That's how incredible the soul record was. Superhuman health, first order passive skill, level 1, increases the effects of healing skills on you by 20%. Plus 120 health points permanently. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner in the Apocalypse. Chapter 162 5 Kilometers of Annihilation. Xietain confirmed the evolution requirements of the new superhuman health skill, but seeing that he needed first-order soul stones in addition to unclassified soul stones, he decided to stop temporarily. Although he still had approximately 7 first-order soul stones left, Xietain knew that such soul stones were currently precious. Unless the first-order creatures suddenly became normal like the other monsters or their numbers increased exponentially, he was not willing to spend all his soul stones. After all, he still needed equipment for himself, for his subordinates, even to evolve other skills. In fact, were it not for the current situation they were in, it was improbable that he would expend one of the few first-order soul stones he had in his inventory. You too should also check to see if any of your passive skills can be improved. Xietain instructed as he looked at the two women beside him. Before we go deeper into the forest, we should take the opportunity to become as strong as possible. Shangguan Bingshui and Wu Yijun nodded at the same time before they began to slide down their own records carefully. While Wu Yijun did not possess any skills before, after acquiring her plant empowerment skill, she began to fight on the front lines regularly, so by killing mutated zombies, mutated animals, and engaging in fighting against more powerful creatures, she was also gradually acquiring some useful passive skills. In fact, with these soul stones, I can level up some skills. Even evolving to the next order is not impossible. Wu Yijun nodded before smiling bitterly and saying in a bittersweet tone, "Unfortunately, my natural stats don't reach the necessary requirement, so I can't do anything about it." "I see." Xietain nodded with understanding. In fact, Lilith had already mentioned previously that evolving skills was by no means a simple thing and that he had been doing it constantly due to fighting beings more powerful than him relentlessly. As his life was constantly in danger, it was only natural that the rewards were juicier. That was precisely why his natural stats were overwhelmingly higher than those of someone at his own level. Otherwise, he would also not be able to level up skills continuously, let alone upgrade orders. Swoosh. 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 The wind suddenly swooshed as several soul stones flew out of the leather bag on Shangguan Bingshui's slender waist. Flash, this is... Xietain muttered to himself as he looked at the light flashing and enveloping the soul stones. The same wonderful effect of the movement of mana together with a strange feeling of closeness every time an evolution happened flooded him. Not only Bai Zemin felt this way, Wu Yijun, and even Lilith herself was no different. The feeling they felt just by the mere fact of being close to the evolution process was so warm that it could not be described in mere words. Bang! With a burst of bright lights, particles of light filled with power surrounded Shangguan Bingshui, and as she kept her eyes closed, savoring the feeling of warmth within her soul, her skill finished evolving successfully. She opened her eyes and sighed softly before looking at Bai Zemin and Wu Yijun with a rare smile. "It's done." Wu Yijun smiled back and congratulated her while Bai Zemin simply nodded towards her and urged, "Let's get going. I'd like to at least get to see the camp before nightfall." His last words were spoken in a joking tone, but the three of them knew that if a situation like the wolf spiders happened again, it was likely that they would not really reach the place even after hours of walking. The group of three advanced through the forest for more than 2 hours. In fact, the amount of time they had to advance to leave the area covered with wolf spider blood totaled an astonishing 30 minutes in all. In those 30 minutes, they had advanced a total of almost 5 kilometers. That meant that all the low-level enemies within 5 kilometers had been slaughtered by Bai Zemin's blood manipulation skill. It was only after seeing such a thing with his own eyes that he finally realized why such a powerful and mysterious being like Lilith said that his skill was more powerful than he believed. Until now, Bai Zemin had only scratched the surface of the full potential of the blood manipulation skill. Just imagining how powerful this skill would be when it evolved and reached higher orders made his heart pound. Along the path, they encountered several enemies. All of them were naturally wild animals that had mutated due to mana and were constantly evolving due to the endless absorption of soul power. After all, unlike intelligent beings who could argue with words other than killing each other, unintelligent animals spent most of their time fighting each other, devouring each other, and constantly getting stronger. This meant that their numbers were steadily decreasing, but as a consequence, the few that remained were becoming more powerful. This would continue until one of them rose into power, becoming a terrifying existence not only with overwhelming might but also with a capacity for reasoning and judgment of its own. Lilith had told him earlier that second-order creatures could judge and have simple thoughts. Although they were not especially intelligent, neither were they incredibly dumb like those unclassified or as suicidal as those of the first order. Fortunately, no powerful beings crossed their paths. Nor were there any instances where large herds of insects or wild animals suddenly appeared and launched an attack against the group of three. "It's only a short distance from here." Wu Yijun paused for a moment and surveyed the surroundings before pointing to a strange rock in front of them. "I remember back then I told my grandfather that this rock was shaped like an alien, and less than 40 minutes later we arrived at the military zone." Bai Zemin and Shangguan Bingshui looked at her with peculiar eyes and then looked at each other silently before looking at the strange rock. "Indeed. It looks like a cartoon-like alien." Bai Zemin didn't know whether to laugh or cry at the sight of the rock that seemed to have a puffy head with bulging eyes and a small body. Shangguan Bingshui shook her head and did not comment on it before she started walking forward. However, just then, several roars echoed from all sides and her movements stagnated to a halt. Rumble. The ground began to shake fiercely as if a high-magnitude earthquake suddenly happened, destabilizing the three of them. "Ah!" Wu Yijun cried out, taken by surprise, as she almost fell and quickly clung to her best friend as she created several ice stakes from which they both leaned on. Bai Zemin's face changed slightly and narrowed his eyes while looking ahead. Even for himself, it was a bit challenging to keep his balance if he stood in the same place without moving. Therefore, he had no choice but to take small steps sideways to adjust to the terrifying shaking of the earth. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner in the Apocalypse. Chapter 163, Clash. Just as they had reached what appeared to be the deep parts of the forest, an earthquake seemed to strike the earth. So much for coincidence. Bai Zemin secretly sneered and prepared to fight. In fact, it wasn't just him who thought that way. After losing her balance at first after being taken by surprise, Shangguan Bingshui immediately recovered, and just like Bai Zemin did, she began to move with short steps and delicate jumps on the ground she was standing on. Although it was relatively more difficult for her, Wu Yijun also managed to find her balance shortly after her childhood best friend. Blood will, 21%/50%. "Here they come. There are so many of them," Bai Zemin announced gravely as his second-order passive skill came into play. Shangguan Bingshui nodded and her eyes flashed with chilling coldness as she looked forward and stood in front of Wu Yijuan to protect her in case of need. Bang! 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 Not only did the ground rumble, but the surrounding giant trees were also knocked down. Some of them were even directly sent flying through the air before falling with a thunderous bang several hundred meters away. My danger sense skill didn't activate until now, so there shouldn't be a second-order existence. Bai Zemin thought silently as he drew his trusty sword from the scabbard strapped to his waist. Only a few seconds later, the enemies appeared in sight of the group of three. Just as Bai Zemin had said, there were many of them. There were mutated white wolves, wolves with blue fur, mutated dogs, mutated cats, there were even meter-high ants. However, the most striking were 10 frontal charging enemies, 2 of them in particular. 2 3-meter-tall bulls whose skin was as red as lava, 3 nearly 4-meter-tall rhinos with a strange metallic black color shining all over their backs, and a huge metallic gray horn just above their noses, 3 lions the same height as the 2 red-skinned bulls, but whose fur seemed to be covered by frost and whose eyes were as blue as the sky, and 2 huge 10-meter-tall elephants that looked like steel machines instead of living creatures with 2 big ivories sticking out of the sides of their mouths. Seeing the lineup of first-order creatures, Bai Zemin secretly clicked his tongue. It was relatively easy for him to defeat them. The problem was that except for the apparently weak fur of the 3 ice lions, the other 7 monsters seemed to be focused on strength and defense. This meant that it would be incredibly difficult for him to finish them off with a single blow. After all, the edge of his Xianyuan sword was not enough to cut through the defense of monsters clearly infinitely close to level 50. Furthermore, aside from the 10 first-order giants, there were also approximately 200 other enemies that were not weak by any means, and if they joined forces they would be a force to be considered. I'll take care of the 200 small ones. Shangguan Bingshui stood beside him and declared, although it is not something I like to admit, you are actually stronger. You can fight against the 10 leaders. If you finish your work first, then you help me. If I finish my work first, then I help you. How about it? Bai Zemin looked at her for a second and it was only then that he remembered that he was not alone. That fighting alongside him was another being who could not be ignored, let alone underestimated. Someone whose talent for controlling mana was even superior to his own. I'll fight too. Wu Yijuan stepped forward with determination. Although I may not be of much help, I think I'll be able to kill 2 or 3 of them. Although Wu Yijuan's level was only 23 and was still even far from the first order, her skill plant empowerment could boost her power to new heights within a forest filled with greenery like this. Therefore, even fighting against several level 24 or 25 mutated beasts without evolving would not be an impossible feat for her. Bai Zemin sheathed his sword again and nodded with a smile, then I'll go help you quickly. Shangguan Bingshui secretly rolled her eyes upon hearing his brazen confidence but had no words to refute. Instead, her eyes glittered with competitiveness and she charged forward without waiting. Ice spear. Her cold voice echoed in the surroundings, and with a wave of her delicate hand, 10 ice spears appeared in the air before shooting out towards 10 different enemies. Without even having crossed the first true stage of evolution, 4 mutated wolves, 3 mutated dogs, and 3 mutated cats whose specialization was agility, did not even have time to react when their heads were pierced and frozen in a cube of ice that soon spread all over their bodies. You have obtained the soul power of Dark Wolf level 23. Agility +4. You have obtained the soul power of Speed Cat level 24. Agility +3. You have obtained the soul power of Saber-Toothed Dog level 25. Shangguan Bingshui's eyes flashed brightly as 10 messages crossed her retina in the blink of an eye. Her red lips curved into a charming smile that, unfortunately, only the beasts in front of her could appreciate. This was the first time she had fought since her evolution to First Order, and seeing that she only needed to consume half the mana she would need in the past to defeat enemies above level 20, she couldn't help but get excited. Furthermore, they were all slaughtered with a simple wave of her hands, something that even for her was hard in the past as her level had been stuck at 25 with no possibility of advancing beyond that. Wu Yijuan did not stand idly around either. She opened the leather sack around her waist and took out several dozen small seeds before pointing in front of her with one hand. Catch them. At her command, the vines among the thick fodder seemed to come to life as they crawled along the ground like snakes before coiling around the bodies of 3 mutated beasts. The creatures that exceeded level 20 roared furiously and fought with all their might, causing the Wu Yijun empowered vines holding them back to start showing signs of breaking into pieces. Just then, the more than 40 small seeds glowed with a strong fluorescent green radiance and under Wu Yijun's command shot out of her hand at speeds impossible for a normal living being to glimpse. Some of the empowered seeds struck the legs, back, ears, and other body parts of the mutated beasts. Blood began to spurt out seemingly uncontrollably as the creatures writhed in pain and fury. However, the monster's struggle only lasted a second as in the next instant several more seeds streaked across the sky and pierced their heads. Although they were small, the empowered seeds were really hard and powerful, so the heads of the 3 mutated monsters were filled with holes and their lifeless bodies fell to the ground with a thud. Xietain surveyed the situation unfolding at lightning speed and thought that the 2 women would probably be fine alone. Besides, with Shangguan Bingshui present, Wu Yijun's safety was practically assured, so he could focus on the 10 leaders of the pack of mutant beasts. The muscles in his legs tensed to the maximum as he leaned slightly down and forward. His blood began to bubble with the excitement of battle, probably an effect of his Blood Berserker unique class. Bang! With a bang that shook the earth several meters around him and with fine cracks that stretched for nearly 10 meters in length, Xietain seemed to disappear from his position. The next instant, he appeared right in front of one of the 2 robotic-looking elephants. Xietain extended both arms forward and his 2 hands clutched tightly onto the creature's 2 ivories. Boom! At the same time that the bodies of both flattened the ground, creating a large hole of several meters in diameter with them as the center, the resulting clash between the robotic-looking elephant's charge and Xietan's own charge caused a thunderous blast. The shockwave destroyed the trees 200 meters around and many mutated beasts whose constitution was weaker exploded into pieces of bloody flesh. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner in the Apocalypse. Chapter 164, Blood Berserker's Power. Boom! The gazes of Xietain and the giant robotic-looking elephant met at the same instant their bodies clashed. The futuristic-looking elephant stomped the ground heavily intending to send the little ant in front of it to fly, but to its utter surprise, its strength was not enough to shake its enemy. So far, the 2 elephants whose body was covered with a strange metallic armor had always been able to send their enemies flying. Their terrifying charges represented total destruction, and anything that got in their paths was immediately overwhelmed. Both creatures were 2 little overlords in this entire forest, and even among the first-order beasts they were respected by the rest. However, one of those terrifying monsters had been stopped in its tracks without being able to advance another step. The giant elephant opened its mouth filled with the blood of some other creature it had probably recently eaten and roared, "Roar all you want." Xietain sneered as his hair shook at his enemy's roar. Without warning, he too gave his own war roar and took a step forward as all his muscles swelled to the maximum extent possible. The giant elephant's eyes widened in shock as he was forced to take a minuscule step backward. One of its hind legs recoiled so slightly that it was almost imperceptible, but it was something that happened. Xietain smiled and took another step forward, forcing the giant beast back another short step and crushing a few unclassified mutant beasts charging from the back of the herd. The second armored elephant roared angrily as it saw one of its fellow armored elephants being forced back and changed its charging course. With a second thunderous roar that sent shockwaves capable of crushing the eardrums of a normal person, the creature lowered its head and pointed its 2 ivories to the front as it looked at Xietain with bloodshot eyes. At the same time, the 4 house-sized first-order lions slowed their steps, raising a cloud of dust in the process and charged towards Xietain at the speed of a whirlwind while freezing the ground with every step they took. The 2 bulls with reddish skin and the 3 black-armored giant rhinos also roared and rushed toward Xietain right behind the second robotic elephant and the 3 first-order lions. Shangguan Bingshui and Wu Yijun could not help but feel their skin ruffled as they saw the giant monsters all running in the same direction with the intention of crushing on Xietain, whose size was that of an ant in comparison. Swoosh! Swoosh! The eyes of the 4 first-order lions glowed with a blue flash, and with a fierce roar, several giant ice stakes shot out from the ground and pierced Xietan's body mercilessly. Just as he was about to be wounded, the broken bronze bell flew out of his pocket and floated above his head, releasing a yellow-colored barrier. Bang! 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 The sharp ice stakes over a meter thick hit the barrier, and slowly cracks began to spread across the protective layer that threatened to collapse under the pressure soon. Xietain half closed his eyes and held his position without moving as the barrier protected him from the ranged attacks of the First Order Lions for a mere 5 seconds before the barrier finally broke into pieces and the broken bronze bell flew back into his pocket without power. Just then the second robotic elephant headed forward and Xietain laughed. He stopped pressing the robotic elephant he was holding tightly with both hands and activated his unstoppable front charge skill. Swoosh! His body seemed to turn into a shadow that slid across the ground and passed underneath the body of the robotic elephant that was being restrained. In just 0.01 seconds, Xietain had appeared 10 meters behind it. Boom! Roar! Just then, just a split second later, there was a huge boom behind Xietain and a terrifying roar that was filled with pain. It turned out that the second robotic elephant charging forward actually failed to stop its charge, as it clearly did not expect its target to disappear without a trace in such a short time, so its two brilliant ivories pierced through the apparently impenetrable armor of the first robotic elephant that Xietain was contending with. But this was not all. When the first robotic elephant was deeply wounded in the abdomen by its companion of the same species, it was forced to walk to the left, and as a consequence one of the black-armored rhinos hit it hard and sent it flying more than 20 meters forward. As for Xietain, he had appeared right in front of one of the 4 First Order Lions. The beast's blue eyes looked astonished at the sudden appearance of a shadow that grew bigger and bigger in its pupils, and just as it was about to open its mouth to bite, the enemy attack reached it. Grit your teeth well, Jungle King. Xietain laughed out loud and pulled the Xianyuan sword out of its sheath as his whole body whirled like a spinning top before slashing with all his might diagonally. Boom! When the metal blade of the Xianyuan sword impacted onto the First Order Lion's head, a deep bloody wound appeared. However, not even a flicker of time later, the entire head of the beast broke into thousands of pieces. The red blood and flesh of the evolved beast tainted the entire battlefield, and the now headless 3-meter body was sent flying straight backward, smashing into several trees in the process and destroying everything in its path. You have received the soul power of First Order Frost Control Lion level 44. You have obtained +10 strength, +8 agility, +4 stamina, +4 health, +4 mana. If it were in normal times, Xietain would definitely not be able to take out the life of the Frost Control Lion with a single attack and in such a simple manner. However, with the increased power that Blood Warlock currently granted him, as well as the 20% increased attack power from using a sword that his Blood Berserker class passively conferred upon him, the situation was different. The current him had almost 40% extra attack power. Roar! The 10 First Order beasts raged and roared in unison as they looked at him with bloodshot eyes. Xietain looked at them back, and a torturous smile appeared on his lips as he stretched his hand forward and pointed at the injured elephant that was looking at him as if it wanted to devour him with its eyes. Too bad, the beast had no such ability. Die! Xietain declared and directly spent 100 mana points. The blood flowing from the body of the wounded robotic elephant moved in order at his command, and as if countless small threads began to cut into the flesh of the beast that soon began to run uncontrollably in tearing pain. However, its uncontrolled charge did not last even 2 seconds, as in the next instant its body shuddered and fell heavily forward as the glow of life left it, while an orb of soul power was absorbed by Xietain. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner in the Apocalypse. Chapter 165, Frightening Speed. You have received the soul power of First Order Armored Elephant level 48. You have obtained strength +15, stamina +10, health +10. With the thin but terrifying strands of blood formed by Xietain under the command of his blood manipulation skill, the inside of the First Order Armored Elephant's already wounded body was torn apart and its heart was completely destroyed. In fact, Xietain did not care about anything but killing his enemy, and that was precisely why he expended so much mana all at once. Otherwise, the cost would have been considerably lower. However, the current situation did not allow Xietain to rest, as although he was strong, he was still facing several First Order existences at the same time. The 3 Frost Control Lions roared at the same time and expelled a powerful ice breath that seemed to be able to freeze everything in its path. In fact, although the frozen breath had not touched the ground and passed over 2 meters high, a thick line over 5 meters thick covered every part it passed through as if it were a laser beam of ice frost. Xietain did not dare to take such a magical attack head-on when he saw the terrifying effect it had on the environment and quickly stomped on the corpse of the frost control lion he had killed a moment ago to propel himself sideways. However, he still underestimated too much the speed at which the 3 frozen breaths flew. While the attack did not hit him directly, only the close aura that came into contact with his body caused a thin layer of ice to appear above him. Damn it, he couldn't help but curse. His black hair now had a thin layer of light blue in it, just like his full coat. His movements naturally became slower, and after a quick analysis, Xietain realized to his utter dismay that in fact, he had lost 15% of his mobility. Although I wanted to restrain myself just in case, I'd better finish this as soon as possible. Xietain thought with a frown. He was afraid of mishaps happening, and that was precisely why he hadn't been using his full power. However, the power of first-order creatures could not be ignored, especially their unpredictable skills. Roar. Just as Xietain thought this, the 2 3-meter bulls with reddish skin let out a strange roar and their 2 eyes turned completely red. A strange reddish aura glowed over their bodies, and the speed of the 2 beasts seemed to become faster at the same time as their bodies grew almost a meter taller. The 3 black-armored rhinos and the last first-order armored elephant lowered their heads in attack position and began to charge wildly towards him. The frost control lions also did not stop after their previous attack and immediately roared skyward again. Dozens of small, thin ice spears appeared above their heads and blasted towards Xietain. From the left, from the right, and from the front, Xietain was attacked from all sides except the back. However, instead of retreating, he snorted and activated for the first time a terrifying skill he had obtained a short while ago. In fact, this skill was from a certain point of view the most powerful skill in his arsenal. After directly spending 40 stamina points, the rune in his soul that represented the active skill second-order lightning movement level 5 flashed. In that instant, everything seemed to slow down. However, Xietain knew that this was just his own perception of the world around him. It wasn't that everything had become slower, it was that he had suddenly become explosively faster. Above his body, small blue lightning flashed constantly like mischievous snakes. All these lightning flashes disappeared inside his body and kept his whole body in a strange state of alarm. Xietan's eyes glittered, and with a slight step forward his body seemed to shudder for a moment. Bang! 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 The magical ice spears that the 2 frost control lions conjured hit the ground hard, and a large frozen cloud slowly rose into the sky. Swoosh! With an almost imperceptible sound, were it not for the tiny crackling lightning flashes on his body, Xietain appeared right above the head of one of the frost control lions. The beast didn't even seem to be aware that its enemy was right on top of it, as it was still casting ice spells towards the same area, just like its fellow of the same species. Boom! Xietain punched with both fists forward not once, but more than 200 times in just 1 second. The result was a thunderous explosion even more powerful than all the previous ones, and the head of the frost control lion exploded into 1,000 pieces just like the previous one. You have received the soul power of First Order Frost Control Lion level 45. You have obtained +5 strength, +3 agility, +1 health, +1 mana. With now over 280 agility points, Xietain was like a ghost. The other first-order existences simply had no way of noticing his movements, and before they could react, the head of the last frost control lion exploded in a bloody mess as well, drenching the ground in red. You have received the soul power of First-Order Frost Control Lion level 44. No more stats, huh? Xietan's voice rang out on the battlefield, but his body could hardly be seen except for the trail of small blue lightning that he left behind wherever he passed by. Shangguan Bing Shui and Wu Yijun had almost finished annihilating all the unclassified enemy beasts, with only about 100 remaining. Although Wu Yijun was panting slightly, she still showed no signs of running out of mana, which was only natural considering that she had gone through a much more terrifying experience than this a few hours ago. However, both women's movements stalled for a moment as they looked dumbfounded at the scene in front of them. Shangguan Bing Shui herself was a powerful first-order existence in her own right, and an extremely powerful one among the first orders. But even she could barely discern even a trace of Xietain. To her surprise, fear, and frustration, she realized that if he so wished, she would not be able to survive a single exchange. What skill is that? She muttered in stupefaction as she noticed the lightning flashing steadily. Xietain didn't stop. He leaned forward and with a swing appeared right under the last remaining frost control lion alive and swung the Xianyuan sword with all his might upwards. Bang! The body of the First Order Frost Control Lion was lifted off the ground over 10 feet and roared in pain as blood spilled out of its mouth and spurted like a fountain from its stomach. Blood spears. Xietain charged towards the last living First Order armored elephant as he pointed behind him and bellowed. Swoosh. 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 The red blood with a slight chilling aura of the Frost Control Lion swished, forming dozens of bloody spears, and with a wave of his hands pierced the body of the already wounded beast. The lion roared in pain and rolled on the ground, losing all battle power and dying a moment later. You have received the soul power of First Order Frost Control Lion level 45. Just as the soul record message flashed in his retina, Xietain had jumped high into the sky and was currently running along the upper back of the armored elephant. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner in the Apocalypse. Chapter 166 Annihilation, Part 1. The last living armored elephant could feel its hated enemy standing over its body, so it immediately began to shake as roars of fury escaped from its huge mouth. Xietain was shaken hard but gritted his teeth and clung to the beast's hard metal-like skin as it continued to make its way towards the head. The armored elephant soon realized that its efforts were being thwarted, so it without hesitation swung its tail and long nose to its back with the intention of either slapping the ant out of its body or crushing it to death. Fortunately, Xietain was already prepared, so under his control, for blood shields flew behind his back just above his body, one on top of the other with a small air gap in between. Bang, bang, bang. The beast's tail and nose pierced through the first and second blood shields with ease, destroying them and splattering its back with the blood belonging to one of the previously slain Frost Control Lions. The third shield was also crushed into liquid droplets again, but the power of the monster's two physical weapons clearly no longer had the same power as before, as when they struck on the fourth and last shield, although succeeding in cracking it, did not manage to break through any further, so the armored elephant had to withdraw its nose and tail to shake them once more. However, that was all it took for Xietain to successfully reach the giant monster's head and stab down at full power with his sword. Clang! Not to his surprise, the tip of the Xianyuan sword failed to penetrate in the slightest, and except for a thin white, nothing else happened. Xietain clicked his tongue in annoyance and began to strike furiously without any ability and just used the sword as if it were a baseball bat. Boom. 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 With terrifying speed, the attacks accumulated rapidly until the metal armor covering the creature's head cracked, revealing the tender red flesh inside. Xietain took advantage and immediately spent another 100 mana points to reverse the blood and make several bloody spears that pierced the monster's brain, killing it immediately. The massive creature's body fell downward, raising a huge cloud of dust and causing the ground to shake violently. You have received the soul power of First Order Armored Elephant level 50. You have obtained Strength plus 10, Stamina plus 10, Health plus 5. In the air, Xietain received the message from the soul record and was secretly surprised. His heart filled with fear as he realized that this armored elephant was in existence on the threshold between the First Order and the Second Order, just one step away from becoming a terrifying being. He had barely reached the ground when he was greeted by the enraged charge of the two First Order bulls. However, swoosh, swoosh, the wind howled and the two creatures continued their charge when suddenly their bodies were cut in two halves. Blood along with flesh and internal organs splattered all over the ground, joining the pool of blood that was beginning to form after the constant bloody accumulation of so many huge creatures. You have received the soul power of First Order Impetus Bull Aura level 38. You have received the soul power of First Order Impetus Bull Aura level 39. Xietain stopped and looked back over his shoulder. The Xianyuan sword in his right hand dripped with the blood of the recently slayed enemies. As if they did not know the meaning of the fear of death, the three black-armored rhinos and the only enemy First Order beings on the battlefield charged forward while roaring loudly. Their hooves left deep marks in their tracks and the earth shook with every movement. Just the sight of such terrifying beings of overwhelming size was more than enough to scare any human. Even more so considering that the physique of humans was naturally weaker than that of animals, something that even the soul record could not change. Most of the time, when a human and a beast of the same level faced each other, the beast had a better chance of winning. These were innate qualities that could not be changed. Of course, there were also species that were not different from humans with terrifying physiques. However, this was something from other worlds and not the Earth where Xietain was born. Xietain advanced instead of retreating, engaging in close combat with the 3 black-armored rhinoceroses. The beasts possessed especially terrifying defense and their strength was monstrous. However, Xieain's agility under the use of his lightning movement skill was comparable to a second-order existence. Therefore, the 3 beasts could not even touch him and the bloody wounds soon began to pile up. Shangguan Bingshui clenched her pearly teeth secretly and her eyes glittered strangely. She pointed her delicate hand skyward and her cold voice rang out, "Ice bullets." Over 100 ice bullets appeared several meters above the ground and with a wave of her hand they began to bombard the battlefield. Bang! 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 The unclassified beasts, numbering approximately about 100 were now scattered, thus several ice bullets hit the ground and created small holes that were soon sealed by a thin layer of ice. However, Shangguan Bingshui had launched a large-scale attack and had not focused on accuracy, instead her main goal was to wipe out as many enemies as possible in the shortest amount of time. Roar! Roar! Several unclassified beasts were pierced in different parts of their bodies. The ice bullets heavily compressed with mana and magic created by Shangguan Bingshui had pierced them from side to side and thumb-sized bloody holes began to appear on several of them. Even those that had been directly slaughtered by 1 or more ice bullets to the head were not spared from having their bodies brutally pierced several more times by Shangguan Bingshui's skill. Swoosh! Suddenly, a silhouette appeared and with a punch, a mutated dog's head was smashed. Shangguan Bingshui sighed as she saw Xietain start attacking the weaker beasts, as this meant that he had finished first. However, before she could think too much, her mind went blank as she saw 2 more Xietain appearing on the battlefield and starting a massacre on the few beasts that had not yet died. What? Wu Yijun exclaimed in shock as she witnessed the scene unfold. Looks like I finished my work sooner. A voice with a hint of mockery sounded from behind both of them and the 2 women hurriedly turned around as they recognized that unmistakable voice. You. Shangguan Bingshui's eyes widened as she looked at Xietain standing only a few steps away. Wu Yijun rubbed her big eyes several times and turned her head repeatedly to look behind her and then ahead. However, no matter what she did, the reality did not change. Indeed, there were 4 Xietain. Behind the Xietain who looked at them with a small smile on his face, the corpses of the 3 black-armored rhinoceroses lay on the ground with numerous wounds and their bodies in a bloody mess. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner in the Apocalypse. Chapter 167 Annihilation, Part 2. Seeing the 2 women in front of him looking at him with surprise impossible to conceal or hide, Xietain naturally understood the reason. That is one of my skills. Those 3 are my clones. He explained without giving too many details about it. Shangguan Bingshui blinked, causing her long eyelashes to flicker gently, and after a moment of hesitation simply nodded without commenting any further on the matter before looking at the 3 clones unleashing a massacre among the unclassified beasts. Although she did not know what kind of skill it was, after looking carefully she easily noticed that although all 3 were clones of Xietain, the overall strength of the 3 was infinitely lower than the real body. Occasionally, there was a level 25 creature at the threshold of evolution that managed to survive 1 or 2 strikes from one of the clones before dying, which if it possessed 100% of Xietan's real power would never happen. This was also natural and allowed Shangguan Bingshui's beating heart to calm down a bit. After all, if a single Xietain was already a monster, then 4 of him with such power would make him practically unstoppable, which made no sense considering that the soul record had arrived on Earth a little less than a month ago. Even monsters needed time to grow. Whoa! That lightning skill must be awesome. Wu Yijun exclaimed like an excited little girl as she watched the blue lightning flashes appearing and disappearing on the surface of Xietan's body. He just smiled slightly and said nothing about it. Lightning movement was a powerful second-order skill at its maximum level. How could it be normal? Besides, Lilith even said that it was one of the strongest skills of one of the archangels of the heavens army that the Bible God led. Given that the effect of the skill that boosted his agility by plus 70 points still lingered, the lightning flashing on his body was too obvious to be ignored. As he did not consume extra stamina by keeping the skill active, Xietain did not think about deactivating it, as it would be pointless to do that to begin with. As the clones made a quick work on the few unclassified beasts, Xietain lamented silently that he had not received any extra stats from the black-armored rhinos. Still, he managed to level up to level 40 and gain another 2 stat points to distribute freely. In short, he had to absorb the soul power of 11 first-order existences, his own category, as well as the soul power of several weaker enemies, to raise just 1 level. Xietain, First Order. Status points, 62. Level, 40. Race, Human. Class, Blood Berserker, Blood Will Mode. Subclass, Lower Leader. Title, One Hit to Kill. Strength, 199, plus 30, / agility, 197, plus 15, equals 212, 282 / health, 233, plus 5, / stamina, 371, plus 5, equals 376, 321 / mana, 297, plus 50, equals 347, 160 / magic, 249, plus 90. Skills. Blood Manipulation, First Order Active Skill, Level 5 / Special Forces Soldier, Unranked Passive Skill, Level 5 / Stone Heart, Third Order Passive Skill, Level 5 / Superhuman Health, First Order Passive Skill, Level 1 / Bronze Skin, First Order Passive Skill, Level 5 / Mechanic, Unranked Passive Skill, Level 3 / Throwing, Unranked Passive Skill, Level 5 / Blood Will, First Order Passive Skill, Level 5 / Crimson Blood Judgment, Third Order Active Skill, Level 5 / Regeneration, First Order Active Skill, LVL 5 / Danger Sense, Unranked Passive Skill, Level 5 / Unstoppable Front Charge, Unranked Active Skill, Level 5 / Lightning Movement, Second Order Active Skill, Level 5. So many status points. Xietain was secretly surprised as he took a quick glance at his status window. At some point, he had simply stopped paying attention to the accumulated status points. He knew they were there and that in times of crisis he could rely on a powerful power boost. It was just that with so many things on his mind and so much work to do, even he himself was not aware that he had gradually accumulated a vast amount of points. In fact, the amount was so great that it was even equivalent to absorbing a large amount of soul power from a powerful enemy. The only difference was that he could use those points in any stat he wanted and improve a particular aspect depending on the situation. Just like in the situation against the Great Fast Mantis, if he encountered an enemy who was able to overcome his agility by a wide margin, then Xietain would use his status points to improve that stat and, at the very least, reduce that gap as much as possible. Depending on the enemy he needed to face, Xietain had a powerful life insurance up his sleeve that no one else knew about except him and Lilith. Thinking about what kind of reaction Shangguan Bing Shui and the rest would have if they knew that he actually still had so much power in reserve, Xietain felt a little amused inside. Soon, the 3 clones of Xietain finished off the rest of the enemies. Since the purge had been quick thanks to Wu Yijun, who still needed the soul power and extra stats, he had only consumed roughly 6 stamina points from the appearance of the clones. Blood Will, 48% / 50%. The 3 looked at each other and all saw relief in their eyes. From the first instant they set foot in this forest, the oppressive aura of mystery, the fear of the unknown, as well as the instinct of danger, had been constantly pressing on their shoulders. Now that the last wave of monsters had been wiped out, they could finally take the final few steps and reach the reward they had been working so hard for. In fact, except for the few hours they slept in the morning to make up for the sleepless night due to the overnight ride, Shangguan Bing Shui and Wu Yijun had been fighting and scouting without even stopping to have a proper meal. As for Xietain, he hadn't even slept except when he lost consciousness after forcing himself too much. Let's let the survivors look over the bodies of the unclassified animals later when we bring a team to collect the armed arsenal and the soul stones. Xietain looked at the 2 women in front of him and remarked, however, we'd better check if we can find first-order soul stones in those 10 evolved beasts. The two women nodded with eyes glittering with comprehension. If another beast appeared in the area and started eating the flesh of the killed First Order, there was a possibility that it would eat the soul stones in case any of the corpses had one. Unclassified animals or insects rarely approached areas where the First Order lurked, and even after their deaths, corpses overflowing with mana was enough to keep them away for several days. However, other First Order existences did not fear. In addition, although it was highly improbable, there was also the small possibility that some powerful human would dare to venture into the forest, and if by coincidence they reached this battlefield and encountered the First Order soul stones, Xietain and the rest would have nowhere to cry later. Therefore, to avoid all this, the three of them began to work together in search of the precious but scarce First Order soul stones. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner in the Apocalypse. Chapter 168 In the Shadows. After searching for a couple of minutes inside the giant skulls of the beasts, Xietain sighed and approached the two women who were just walking in his direction with helpless expressions. "Looking on your faces, I guess there wasn't so much luck?" Xietain smiled bitterly and, although he asked a question, his voice sounded more like a certitude. Wu Yijun opened her palm, revealing the bright glow of a deep blue rock the size of a baby's fist with several imperfections and splinters. "I only managed to find this one inside one of the First Order lions," she revealed somewhat bitterly. Shangguan Bingshui opened her two palms and shook her head. "I wasn't so lucky either. I only found these two. Forget it." Xietain sighed and opened his palm, revealing a First Order soul stone as he said in a self-comforting voice, "At least we managed to obtain 4 First Order soul stones." "That's good enough, I guess." The two beautiful women exchanged glances with each other before shrugging and nodding. Then, they handed the 3 First Order soul stones they had found to Xietain, and he kept them together with the others in his bag. Out of a total of 10 First Order creatures, the group of 3 had only managed to obtain a total of 4 First Order soul stones. This meant that less than 50% of the beasts had managed to form a soul stone in their bodies. "Shall we continue then?" Wu Yijun asked as she looked at Xietain and leaned her face in a cute manner. Xietain nodded with a serious expression and pointed at the bodies of the First Order beasts. "We should finish everything quickly to bring workers to this place. The bodies of the First Order existences are a treasure no matter which way one looks at it, and losing even one of them would be a sorrow." Shangguan Bingshui nodded in agreement and pointed out, "Indeed. Not only are their pelts and shells extremely tough and hard, some even like metal or surpassing it. The flesh of their bodies and the blood is extremely nutritious for the human body. The flesh and blood of First Order creatures were not only extremely delicious when it was properly cooked, but it could also grant free stat points to those who were weaker and even help to cure illnesses such as colds." Fortunately, in addition to the 4 First Order soul stones, Wu Yijun had also found a skill scroll that was given to Xietain. He simply put it in his bag to look at it later, since the sun was barely illuminating the thick forest with the approach of night, and he knew that it would be better to finish the ride as soon as possible to maximize their safety. Soon, the 3 of them left the area and went deeper into the forest. "Phew." Xietain loudly exhaled a sigh of relief when he finally saw the military camp a few meters ahead. All along the way, his muscles had been tensed to the max, and he was on constant alert. This was because the appearance of the 10 First Order creatures and the other unclassified beasts was too abnormal. Generally, the beasts fought each other since they had no intelligence, they just followed the instinct to constantly evolve without stopping. Therefore, Xietain had been waiting for the appearance of some monster or anomaly, just like when they had not yet left the university grounds, where the existence of the mana embryo had caused the creatures in the area not to fight among themselves, suppressing the fierce instinct within them. However, it seemed that his concerns were unnecessary, as there was no trace of a creature capable of threatening the lives of the trio present. Shangguan Bingshui also let out a faint sigh of relief, showing that he was not the only person present who was worried about the dangers that might lurk further down the path. From the terrifying appearance of the sea of wolf spiders to the pack of unclassified beasts under the leadership of the 10 First Order creatures, no matter which of the two situations it was, both were extremely dangerous. A normal human being or even an armed army would have been annihilated without a doubt under such attacks. In fact, if not for Xietan's irregular existence, Shangguan Bingshui herself and Wu Yijun would have been killed by the sea of spiders. Even if Shangguan Bingshui did not faint due to her arachnophobia, her mana and stamina would have been exhausted before she managed to get out of the arachnid ring. As for killing over 100,000 beasts single-handedly, it was not something a first-order being could accomplish just because they were a higher order. Therefore, it could be said that only Bai Zemin's group currently had the qualifications to reach this place, and, perhaps, a few outstanding geniuses or lucky people who had their own fortuitous encounters. Unknown to Bai Zemin was that several hundred meters distance away, on a tree, a small ape with a head almost as big as its body was gazing at them coldly. The ape's body was slender and about 5 feet tall. Its 2 bulging eyes flashed with intelligence that a normal monster should not possess, and the beast seemed to hesitate before leaping from the tree and fleeing in a southwesterly direction, disappearing into the dense foliage of the forest. Bang! Bai Zemin kicked the double metal gate sealing the entrance to the military settlement, sending it flying several meters and causing a rather loud bang to echo everywhere. A group of zombies near the entrance turned their pale faces and their lifeless eyes fixed on the group of 3 that had just entered the facility. With growls that seemed to come from the depths of their throats, the 20-plus zombies began to stagger toward them while waving their hands. Wu Yijun and Shangguan Bingshui sighed at the sight of the military uniform the zombies were wearing. Although they had guns on their waists and a few of them even carried machine guns on their backs, the zombies did not know how to use weapons, they just moved forward and scratched or bit out of instinct. Bai Zemin did not care whether these zombies were brave soldiers of the country in the past or not. To him, anything that stood in his way of survival and his family was an enemy that needed to be eradicated. Therefore, without even hesitating, he pulled out the desert eagle he had hidden on the inside of his full coat and pointed it forward. A thunderous bang sounded, and 50 meters ahead, a zombie in military uniform received a bloody hole right in the middle of its forehead before collapsing with a thud on the floor. With a skilled Special Forces soldier, Bai Zemin was comparable to the best elites of humanity before the apocalypse. Therefore, his shooting skill was almost perfect. In fact, he was confident of successfully hitting his enemy's head as long as he was a maximum of 200 meters away from him. Attracted by the sound of the loud gunshot, more and more zombies were attracted by the noise and began to move towards the entrance of the military camp with staggering steps. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner in the Apocalypse. Chapter 169, Surprise Attack. Holding his Desert Eagle in his right hand, Bai Zemin aimed at the zombies and fired continuously. His expression was so nonchalant that he looked like a person playing a target shooting video game on a console rather than a person who was firing a real weapon to take the lives of people who in the past were the protectors of his homeland. The zombies were constantly moving, which made it difficult to aim and greatly decreased the hit rate. However, this was only for a normal soldier. From a distance of less than 100 meters, it was simply impossible for Bai Zemin to miss unless the zombies' movement speed was infinitely higher than the current one. Therefore, each shot impacted powerfully on a zombie's forehead, exploding their heads and staining the ground with blood and brain matter. After finishing the first magazine, Bai Zemin took out another one and calmly replaced it before resuming the one-sided slaughter. With each shot, a zombie would fall and Bai Zemin would step forward. Although he could simply decapitate them all, he wanted to improve his current marksmanship even more. While it was true that the Special Forces soldier skill gave him a high level of hit rate, he himself could improve that marksmanship by practicing on his own. Shangguan Bingshui looked at him for a moment before hesitating and pulling out a Type 54 pistol from her waist. She took a second to aim at a zombie more than 30 meters ahead and then pulled the trigger without changing her expression. Bang! A bloody wound appeared on the zombie's head and the creature, deprived of all reasoning, fell lifeless to the ground. A small orb of soul power came out of its body and entered Shangguan Bingshui's body. However, the difference between the soul power gained and not having gained anything was not so big to the current her. Bai Zemin looked at her with indifferent eyes before continuing to shoot. However, he was secretly surprised by her marksmanship. Seeing her shoot in such a manner made his thought that she was part of a powerful family only increased even more. Although it was possible that she had obtained some skill scroll that granted her such marksmanship, his instinct told him that this was not the case here. Wu Yijun shrugged her shoulders at the sight of the two of them shooting zombies to death and stood in a corner as she surveyed the surroundings with her big eyes filled with curiosity. Because she had not trained in any martial arts or anything similar, Wu Yijun had been just an ordinary girl without any outstanding physical prowess before the intervention of the soul record on Earth. In fact, Bai Zemin was not much different from Wu Yijun in this respect. Although he was stronger and faster than the average person, he was completely within human limits and was nothing exaggerated. However, after being constantly enhanced by the power of the soul record, having absorbed the soul power of different types of beings, both of them had acquired a number of different combat skills that increased their overall power by a wide margin. It was just that these skills consumed too much additional mana and stamina, so they could not be depended upon at all times. Furthermore, while it was true that evolved first-order creatures were almost completely immune to firearms, this type of existences were still relatively rare in comparison. Therefore, the firearms created by mankind were extremely useful and powerful against unclassified enemies. Mastering marksmanship and increasing the hit rate of shots not only prevented stamina from being consumed, but as a consequence, the chances of survival in different situations would also be higher. After Bai Zemin and Shangguan Bingshui drew all the zombies after making a commotion with more than 40 shots, he unsheathed his Xianyuan sword and rushed forward like an arrow. His right hand seemed to turn into a shadow, and in the blink of an eye, the heads of several zombies flew through the air, bringing with them seemingly endless torrents of blood. Shangguan Bingshui was not far behind either, as with a simple wave of her hand, several ice bullets appeared above her, and in the next instant they shot out towards different targets. The zombies that were hit by the ice bullets died regardless of whether they were hit in the head or not. This was because they were all turned into frozen ice statues before exploding into pieces, filling the ground with tiny pieces of ice that looked like beautiful, delicate crystals. After eliminating the zombies, Bai Zemin in the company of the two women explored the military camp carefully to make sure that there was no hidden danger. When the group wiped out all the hostile beings inside the military camp that were moving freely, they divided into two groups. Shangguan Bingshui and Wu Yijun went to check the parking area for heavy vehicles with military weapons. As for Bai Zemin, he hurriedly ran to the storage locker where the armaments were kept, following the directions Wu Yijun had given him before. So that's how it is? Bai Zemin muttered to himself. In front of him, a metal door that was firmly closed with several electronic security locks barred his way. The door was obviously made of extremely strong metal capable of resisting external firepower. However, you can't stop me. He unsheathed his Xianyuan sword and placed the tip on the metal door. Then he pushed inward, easily piercing through the door until half of the over a meter-long sword blade had disappeared out of sight. Like a knife slicing through hot butter, the Xianyuan sword's blade easily cut the military security door open in half in a matter of seconds. The Xianyuan sword might not be able to pierce the defense of first-order creatures that exceeded level 40 by a wide margin. However, being able to pierce the defenses of an armored vehicle, cutting this metal door was not a challenge at all for Bai Zemin. Boom! The multi-ton heavy door fell heavily backward and the ground shook fiercely, causing several cracks to spread across the thick concrete walls of the vault. Bai Zemin took a step forward, but just then his blood will skill activated and his expression changed slightly. Bang! 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 A golden shower of bullets from inside the vault suddenly fell on Bai Zemin, and his body was hit countless times. A dozen men dressed in military uniforms held Type 56 semi-automatic assault rifles in their hands and opened fire without hesitation while looking in the direction of the door with eyes filled with fear. Due to his bronze skin skill, which gave him a tougher and more resistant skin than any living being before the awakening of mana with the intervention of the soul record, normal bullets could no longer hurt Bai Zemin. Only armor-piercing bullets or heavy weapon bullets could actually pierce through his defenses. However, that did not mean that he was immune to bullets completely. Bai Zemin quickly raised both arms in a cross and hurriedly covered his face and head as pain flashed in his eyes. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner in the Apocalypse. Chapter 170 Fuqigong. Bai Zemin backed up several steps while raising both arms in front of his face, covering most of his head. The muzzles of the guns in the hands of the military roared in sync and covered his body with hundreds of shots in a matter of a second. However, all those bullets simply ricocheted and flew to the ground, falling with loud metallic sounds. Zemon's full coat was a rare-grade treasure capable of protecting him from smaller-caliber bullets, but it did not protect him against intermediate-caliber bullets, let alone high-caliber bullets. Fortunately, with his passive bronze skin skill and his full coat working in tandem, 90% of his body only felt a slight tingle that was easily ignored by him. However, the same could not be said for the area of his legs below the knee and his bare hand. Zemon's face wrinkled slightly due to the pain, and for a moment the urge to slaughter all the people inside the armed arsenal consumed him. However, he fought against that desire and forcibly suppressed it. While these rather old vintage gun bullets did not have the power to really hurt him, his internal organs were as weak as they had always been in the past, so it was extremely painful to receive such metallic impacts at such speed constantly. The broken bronze bell was currently recovering its depleted power within the pocket of his full coat. After all, about an hour ago, the defensive barrier was completely crushed by the First Order Frost Control Lion's magical attacks, and it needed 24 hours to recover its power again. Zemon took a side step and his body swayed, disappearing from the sight of the armed military men. Disappeared. He really is a monster. It's over. We're dead, the soldiers began to wail. Remember. A middle-aged man with an average appearance, but with a brave and stern expression, apparently the leader of this troop, shouted, "If the worst comes to the worst, then we will detonate this whole place and take this demon with us to hell." Behind the wall, Zemon rubbed his hands together, and seeing the white marks he couldn't help but grimace as he cursed under his breath. He had not killed the military for 2 reasons. The first reason was because these military men had fired immediately out of fear of what was happening in the world outside the vault. Even with so many guns, they had not yet left the place, which meant that whatever they had seen outside had destroyed all their hopes. Such people were not necessarily their enemies. On the contrary, they could become one of his strongest allies in the early stages if Zemon played his cards right. This was precisely the second reason. He lacked people with military training and skill in firearm control. Not only would it be good for him if these militias obeyed him for a mere reason, if he could get them to become his subordinates, then Zemon could get them to train more survivors under a strict military regime. Besides, Zemon needed people who knew how to operate military vehicles. If Shangguan Bing Shui and Wu Yijun found armaments similar to tanks or even battle helicopters, Zemon would need people capable of operating such machines. Something he currently lacked. "Don't open fire. I'm human just like you," he shouted in a deep voice from his temporary hiding place. "Nonsense." A military man roared from a distance and spat on the ground. "A human immune to bullets from a dozen guns and capable to move at such speed?" "Huh." Other military men echoed his words and did not let their guard down. They were still holding on to their weapons tightly, and some of them were even preparing to throw hand grenades. Zemon frowned and replied in a flat voice, "I really am human. Didn't you see the status window? By killing zombies or other types of enemies with your own ability and without using forces that don't belong to you, you can absorb an energy called soul power and grow. That's how I became more powerful." Hearing his words, the military fell silent and looked at each other. Hesitation flashed in the eyes of many, so after a moment they looked at their leader. "Platoon leader Fu, what do we do?" a bespectacled and somewhat thin man whispered to the middle-aged man. Platoon leader Fu fell into deep contemplation. Seeing this, some of the military men became agitated and began to shout that they should fight to the death. Platoon leader Fu, don't believe him. You yourself saw how cruel people have become now. Platoon leader Fu, let's fight. With all this weaponry, even if we have to die, we will drag him with us. Seconds turned into minutes, and Zemon finally began to lose his patience. Although he valued the bravery of being willing to die fighting in times of crisis where there was nowhere to run, he did not have too much time to waste trying to convince a group of people. There were still many things that needed his direct intervention before they could get going properly. Too bad. Zemon sighed. His eyes grew cold and his body began to exude overwhelming murderous intent that made the military men's faces turn pale. To survive, to become stronger, and gain the power needed to fulfill his promise as well as to find and protect his loved ones, Zemon had killed tens of thousands of zombies, nearly 30 First Order beings, hundreds of thousands of mutated animals and insects. To say that he had walked over mountains of corpses and stepped on the bones of so many living beings while bathing in their blood was no exaggeration. His once white and innocent hands were long gone. Therefore, Xietan's murderous intent was powerful. Murderous intent was something a normal person could never feel. However, the military men inside the weapons vault were not normal people. Therefore, they could sense death coming closer and closer. Wait a moment. The voice of the man called Platoon Leader Fu rang out and stopped Xietan's movements momentarily. Platoon Leader Fu. The military looked at him in shock and exclaimed loudly. However, shut up. You all shut up for me. The immediate superior's reprimanding shout echoed through the thick walls, and all the military men unconsciously shut their mouths. As soldiers, following orders was something that had already become deeply ingrained within them. The man the military referred to as Platoon Leader Fu looked towards the place where Xietan's voice came from, and while taking cover behind a large metal box filled with ammunition said in a friendly voice, "Little brother, may I know what your name is?" "My name is Fu Qigong, leader of the 10th platoon of the 4th military company belonging to the 2nd battalion of this base. I would like to chat with you." Hearing the words of the man named Fu Qigong, Xietain secretly let out a sigh of relief. As long as they could chat, then he was confident in taking things to where he wanted them to go.